right, so what's this picture of? It's got men in it, sure. What's going on?
They're playing a game.
Yep.
On the left.
Yep.
That looks a little like a game. Trenches on the right.
You got guys on the right, they're climbing out of the trenches. And they're just kind of hanging out down here. You guys probably can't tell from the uniforms, we've got a mix of French and Germans here. And they're playing a soccer game. Yep. How do you guys remember what I said about the Christmas truce?
The truce for Christmas?
1914.
That's so cute.
The war's about to break it, the war's breaking out, right? And both sides' governments are saying, don't worry, we've got this whole thing figured out. You're going to be home before Christmas. It's going to be a quick war. Christmas rolls around, the war's not even going the way they were playing. It's total stalemate. So we're just kind of sitting. You can imagine sitting in a hole on Christmas. It's cold. You're away from home, probably for the first time in your life, fighting a war. And then you get a message that the other side has put up a white flag. Now, contrary to what popular belief is, white flag is not surrender. White flag is we want to talk. You know, let's have a truce. Let's talk. And so you're like, truce, okay. And so you get up and you go up and you start talking to them. You go to the middle of no man's land and say, hey, I just want to tell you Merry Christmas. And so what happens is on Christmas they call a truce. We're not going to fight. It's Christmas Day. No one dies today. So everyone comes out of the trenches, they clear out no man's land, and they have a soccer game between the two. And then they start exchanging gifts, like, what do you need? And it's like, you need a razor? Are you out of soap? You know, need toilet paper? What do you need? And so they start making gifts to each other for what they don't have. And they celebrate. They pool all their food resources together, have a nice meal. And at the end of it, once it's in, okay, so I say one more time, Merry Christmas. They go back. The next day, war's back on to each other. Which, you know, probably hard for us to wrap our heads around to some extent, because how could you do that? And to be honest, it was hard for them to do it as well. They think it's like, but these are guys just like us. Why are we fighting them again? So the high command is furious at this happening. You know, on both sides, they're like, how dare you do this? But the thing is like, how are you going to punish your entire army for doing something you didn't want them to do, you know? So it's kind of like writing to say, well, don't let it happen again. But the thing is this did happen again through different times throughout the war. Even World War II, there's some stories where there's this bombardment was going on as the Germans were bombarding the Allies, and then the bombs would stop dropping, and then they hear the Germans start singing Silent Night. And so the Allies all jump in, they're all singing Silent Night. As soon as they finish singing the song, the bombs start up again. Yeah, right? Musical, World War II. Now, the thing of it is that a lot of these folks were just, you know, if you think about it, war is a constant state of terror. You know, the best description I've ever heard of war states that war is long periods of boredom followed by moments of absolute terror. I'm not talking like, oh, you're afraid. I'm talking you are so scared you're not thinking. Your brain just shuts down. You can't even really react. You're so afraid. Because the thing with this is like, how many of you guys ever played laser tag as a kid? It's a lot of fun, yeah. But there are moments like where you're exposed, you're getting shot at, and you're getting like hit, because like whenever you get hit, you got this goofy little vest on. It goes like, you have been hit. You're like, ah, you know, who's shooting me? Things like that. And so basically, if you're exposed, you're like freaking out, like, how do I get out? You know, like you try to like find a place to hide while like, you know, your battery pack recharges. Like, all right, you can shoot again now, and things like that. But it's, you know, this is just how it is. Only imagine that happening, but you die. Or you're getting shot and someone dies next to you, and you're like, how do I escape? How do I survive? You know, this is war. And so, wouldn't you want to break from all that? Just like, hey, we're just going to go and we're going to celebrate Christmas.
How can they act normal?
How
can they act normal though after everything has been and soccer?
True, and certainly you have to have like this imagination, like they had to have some like, these guys that would be like, can you really trust them, things like that. The other thing is they're teenage boys.
I mean, like, they've been through so much, and they have, like, been through.
Oh, sure, yeah. And a lot of them came back with all kinds of problems with PTSD. The thing is that there wasn't a lot of study into that in terms of psychology at the time. It was just called cowardice. It's like, but I feel bad about the war. Man up.
It's like that one guy, when he started, like, having that seizure or whatever, that
Yes. Yeah, they started calling it shell shock in World War, I think it was World War I, might actually been World War II. But basically it's this, you're experiencing abject terror and your brain shuts down, essentially. Basically what it is it's, I believe the clinical definition is when your body enters fight or flight, which is when your body starts like ramping up to defend itself, for just like randomly, because of small little triggers, so to speak. And that's the thing about post-traumatic stress. It can happen to anybody that's been stressed. There are folks going to 9/11 with it, folks who've been in car crashes, just all kinds of stuff like that. My wife has it from her car crash. To this day, she has trouble sometimes driving because, she'll have this flashback about, well, not a real flashback, that's just the wrong sense of the word. If people say flashback and I think it's like, so it's like, I'm still there, man. It's more like a learned response, if that makes any sense. So sort of like how you can learn a response to react to stimulus in a way that's unexpected. You can do the same sort of thing with fight or flight, and that's post-traumatic stress disorder. And a lot of guys were coming back with that. The fact of the matter is that after World War I, there was a huge problem with alcoholism, as folks dealt with in their own way. Not to mention, pretty much every single soldier in World War I smoked like a chimney. If you think about it, cigarettes and nicotine in particular are depressants. They calm you down. And so if you're in this heightened, stressful environment, you take a depressant, it's going to make you feel better. Alcohol is a depressant. It calms you down. So it's a way of dealing with high stress that's completely unhealthy, there's no question about that, but this is just a common thing. Cigarettes were life in World War I and World War II, for that matter, as well. It's kind of interesting that the U.S. Army gave rations to its soldiers, and rations are basically like, here's your food for the week or the day or whatever. Inside of that were cigarettes. So it was like, I forget how many cigarettes they gave you a day up in the 1980s, but like even up to the 1980s, the U.S. Army, whenever like you got your ration or your, I think they were called the C rations, it had cigarettes, like a pack of cigarettes. So it's like, let people smoke. It's like, well, everyone did pretty much. But if you ask Mr. House, he talks about how he would trade cigarettes, because he didn't smoke, with people who did for like snacks or whatever they had on them. It's like, what do you got? Well, I got a can of peaches, so, and got that one out. But it was a tool, as much as anything else. But that also brings to us the point of how do you get people mentally to get to that point? Because you think about it, you spend your entire life hearing how killing is bad. Yes, it's amoral, you don't kill people, it's wrong. But suddenly it's okay. If you're a soldier, we have to reprogram you mentally to be able to kill the enemy. And that's not easy to do. If you look at what the purpose of basic training is in the military, or boot camp, as some people say, the purpose of it is to put you in a high-stress environment and see if you can follow orders. One of the biggest problems in the military is getting you to do something that you really don't want to do. Like, there's a machine gun nest over there. You, go attack it. How are you like, sure, no problem. No, you're not going to want to do it. And if you think about it, boot camp is aimed at weeding out people who can't adapt. I mean, why is it that drill instructors are yelling at you in your face and getting up to you and stressing you out, things like that? Because if you can't follow enough orders to make your bed, or shine your shoes, or you can't do something like that that's really basic and easy, correct, under stress of some dude yelling at you, then how in God's name are you going to be able to fight a war when you're getting shot at? It's all about mental programming. It's to build up your confidence and to make you part of a team. But this also means completely rebooting civilian mentalities, so that whenever you get out of the Army, you have to try to now be a civilian again. You know, people talk about coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. It's like where it's commonplace you carry your weapon, to weapons are not allowed in public places. You know, things like it is acceptable to shoot people that are threatening you to. You know, it's not anymore. You know, it's a completely different mentality. And the thing of it is, it goes beyond just the soldiers fighting the wars. We as a nation have to support the war if we're going to stay in war, because ultimately the objective of the enemy is to try to make us give up. That's how you lose a war, when you say I've had enough. Every single war that has ever ended in the history of mankind has ended with one side surrendering. You've never had an instance of completely wiping out a group of people, although World War II came close to that. There was a fear in World War II that the only way we were going to get the Japanese to surrender was by massacring every single one of them, every man, woman, and child. And not without good reason. In World War II, there were many instances of when the Allied forces were coming up on these towns in the Pacific, and the invasion forces were coming in, and basically the civilians there would commit mass suicide. You'd have mothers throwing their children off of a cliff and then jumping off after them, instead of being captured by the Americans. Now, part of this is because their government was spreading propaganda, which I'll get to in a second, that said that Americans are rapists and murderers and cannibals, and that whenever the Americans took your city, they were going to eat your children, they were going to rape your women, and they were just going to do all kinds of horrible things to you. It's better to be dead than surrender. So, you know, this is what they believe. The propaganda is a tool that is used by the government to increase support for the war. Propaganda is media that is used by the government, essentially. Now, in the case of today, we have all kinds of media at our disposal. All of us carry around devices all the time that gives us connection to the internet, to television, to social medias, to all kinds of different bits of information that all can be utilized to change your opinions on things. What's fascinating is how media can really affect how we think about things. A great example of this, there was a guy who did a sociology experiment on the way we think about police actions, police shootings and things like that. So what he did is he took these videos. There was two top videos of the same incident. And one video shows this guy in front of like a 7-Eleven who starts running, and then like these police just start gunning him down. He shot like 15 times. And basically he would show this one where people were like, what do you think, was this shooting justified? And people were outraged. No, he was just running away. He wasn't hurting anybody. And it was killing right in cold blood. The other video shows before that, where this guy was waving a gun and pointing at the police and telling how he was going to shoot him. The police were like, dude, calm down. Just, put the gun down. We'll talk. And they did this like 3 different times, trying to get this guy to calm down. At one point, he starts running off with the gun towards a group of kids, and they drop him. And then I asked him, was this shooting justified? They were like, absolutely. He was going to go kill these kids over here. Might have, they had, it was a hard decision, but, you save these kids, or what do you do, sort of things like that. It was all about how the instance was portrayed in the media. And so a media outlet, Fox News, MSNBC, anybody can change what they present to you and basically change your minds about things. It's not brainwashing. It's not like they're going to suddenly change everything about you, but we believe what we see. And if the media controls what you see, then it can control how you think. Okay, that's propaganda in a nutshell. Now, the media sources they had in things were slightly limited. They had newspapers, they had magazines, they had billboard posters, pamphlets, things like that. They didn't have television or radio and that kind of stuff, but it was still pretty effective. And propaganda was aimed at making the enemy seem as demonic as hateful, as weak, as terrible as possible to make any act of violence against them perfectly acceptable. Racism was a great tool. People are inherently racist. You guys are aware of this fact. Let's talk racism for just a second. Racism is something that people don't like to talk about because it's a taboo subject. But the fact of the matter is, it's actually based upon human thought. Essentially, racism is where you take one group of people and apply a limited experience with this group of people and apply it to everybody, usually in a negative connotation. Racism can actually be positive, but it is generally, we see an expression of negativity. And so basically what it is that if you see something and believe it to be true based on limited information, is what it really comes down to. Now the reason we do this, for the most part, we come from tribal identities that are based upon race. Races are kind of basically the same way as tribe. And if you have a tribe that is survived, or trying to survive on limited resources, anybody who looks different than you is an enemy. And so we have this attitude of, hey, if they look different, they are bad. Furthermore, this attitude that all people that look the same are inherently the same is completely widespread. And when we break it down to it, we think about it, that's of course preposterous, but we tend to believe in certain racial characteristics even when they are patently false. For instance, all black people are athletic. All Asians are good at mathematics. Hell, even the term Asian is a stupid concept. Because Asian can be Russian, it can be Iranian, it can be Chinese. It's a big continent. Where we talk about Asian, what we tend to think of as East Asian, but again, that's a very wide distinction. We're talking Cambodian, Japanese. What I'm saying is that this in and of itself is a racist concept, and it's fairly widespread. We don't think about it. But if we actively use racism as a tool to make our enemy malicious, monstrous, it can be effective as a tool. The problem, though, is after the war's over, how do you erase this? I remember when I was teaching a governor's job at Murray State, there was a little project we did where we actually went to a cemetery and we're looking at gravestones and figuring out the kind of history of this area we were in based upon what people's gravestones said. Trying to figure out if there was any diseases or things like that, what were the causes of death and all this different stuff. And we came across this one tombstone of a guy who fought in World War I, World War II, and the Korean War. We're like, dude, that guy was everywhere. And so we were thinking about think about the mental aspect of this. So World War I, okay, who are my enemies? Well, your enemies are Germany, okay. Your enemies are Turkey, okay. And your enemies are the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Okay, I can do this. World War II rolls around. Okay, who are my enemies? Okay. Germany again, fantastic, okay. What about Austro-Hungary? No, they don't exist anymore. Okay, who's my other enemy? Italy. Wait, I thought they were our friends. No, that was the last war, your enemy. Okay. What about Turkey? No, they're our friends now. Okay. Who else? Well, also Japan. Okay, so that's our enemy. Okay, cool. Korean War rolls around. Okay, who are my enemies this time? Germany again? No, they're our allies this time. Well, half of Germany's our allies, the other half not so much. Okay, what about Italy? No, they're our friends this time. What about Japan? They're our enemy? No, they're your friends this time. Okay, China's your enemy this time. Wait, I thought they were our friends. No, that was the last war. It's just kind of how does that work? Especially when you're using racism and things. Again, that's one of the reasons that I really kind of like the movie Gran Torino. Is it shows this guy who is a soldier who's incredibly racist towards people from Vietnam, places like that, and yet kind of learns to like some of them, and you have this sort of situation. He's still completely racist, but again, you kind of understand why, because he fought in this war, and it's that's how they encourage people to be that. I'll show you what I mean here in just a sec.
What do you have to be an LPD was? What year did you
I know, right? I forget exactly, but I think we looked at him. He was 16 when he joined World War I. and, kind of went through all that.
Still kind of old then for what he
Yeah.
would do.
So we assumed that if he was going through all those different wars, he must have had like a desk job of some fashion, because you're not like a frontline soldier at all. You just can't do it. Like maybe he worked in the Pentagon or something like that. We don't know. We never did find out. But we did actually. What we tried to do is we found how many wars were represented. We found this one cemetery, every American war represented. There's a big group of folks who fought in the American Civil War, both for the Confederacy and for the Union. We found a guy who fought in the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812. We found all this different stuff. It was a really cool trip we took, especially because it was spurred of the moment. That's the thing I love about GSP. What happened was, we met in class, like we just did, they were like, right, let's go. We just walked out the door. Okay, and we walked for a mile. So I was like, what's going on? Like, this is cool. It was fun. All right, so this is a bit of propaganda that was spread by the Germans. And this is a Zeppelin, as you can see, bombing London. And basically, what this is trying to show is that the Germans have strength. That the British can't stop us. So it's just a matter of time before we win anyways. The purpose of propaganda is to encourage the German people, in this case, to support the war. Hey, we're winning. Keep supporting the war. Another couple examples. Here we have an American example, Halt the Hun. And you'll see this word thrown around a lot in propaganda in the U.S., is that the Germans were, these descendants.
Mary McNeil, Jalen Thompson, Bria Garner, Taylor Starks, Aaron Wiedemeyer, Hannah Lawrence, Cameron Shorten, Riley Childs to come to the library, please. Thank you.
They had this whole thing where they were comparing the Germans to the Huns, this barbarian group that would ravage Europe. And so they're basically trying to show them as being barbarous and mean and cruel and wicked. And, look at this, you got this woman and her child, and she's cowering, this Hun's like, yeah, I'm going to do terrible things to you, girl. And this guy's like, nope, rejected, not on my watch, bub. And sort of like putting him in a chokehold. And let's see, buy U.S. government bonds, third-party loans. One of the biggest problems with the war is we have to pay for it. And the fact of the matter is taxes aren't enough to cover a total war. A total war, and this is the first total war, is a war where everyone is involved in the war effort, not just folks actually in the army. We're talking everyone. If you can't physically fight, like let's say you're in a wheelchair, you can support the war effort by buying bonds. Bonds are basically loans you give to the government towards the war effort. There's all kinds of other little things you can do, like your job, doing certain efforts to try to make the economy work better. Heck, there's all kinds of signs that they had about trying to prevent the flu from breaking out. Make certain you wash your hands, because if you get sick, that actually is helping the enemy. Stuff like that. That actually might be World War II, now I think about it. But still, this idea that you are fighting the war just by being a civilian, you're fighting right now. This was a widespread concept of total war. That, and we're taking every single effort we have, every single dollar we have, and we're putting it towards the war effort. So if you think about all the crap we manufacture in the United States still today, even as a post-industrial economy, we make a lot of stuff. We make dishwashers, we make cars, we make radios and televisions and all this other kind of nonsense. We stop making those in total war. Instead, all we make is bombs, all we make is guns, all we make is bullets. That's it. Our whole effort is on the war. This is the equivalent. I don't know if you guys ever played Texas Hold'em or seen Texas Hold'em or any kind of game like that. You guys know there's a maneuver all in. We put every single dollar you have on the table for that particular hand. This is all in for a war. We're going all in, and it's either victory or death. That's total war. It's the first time it's ever happened. And it's not just us. It's all of the competing nations doing this. Everybody's all in. So we're talking about some pretty severe consequences by the end of it. Here's another couple examples. Here is an example again of the U.S. trying to encourage people to enlist in the U.S. Army. And then on the left, on the right here, we have an example of a Prussian bit of propaganda. Now, on the left-hand side, what's going on? Yeah, kind of. It actually wasn't specifically heavily based off King Kong, but same kind of mad ape portrayal, which had been going on before King Kong the movie. But yeah, totally. You got this guy with a bloody club holding a half-naked woman. He's tearing her off, to do terrible stuff. And it's like, this is what they're going to do. They're going to do terrible things to people, and you can stop it. It's made to make you mad. You look at what these terrible people are doing, and you need to stop this from happening. It's to try to drum up support for the war. What's interesting is the British, and actually the French as well, to my knowledge, had a tradition where they would use groups of young women, usually it was pretty young women, to go publicly shame any young man who wasn't in uniform. Basically, they would get these groups of women to go, and if they saw a guy without a uniform on, they would call him a coward and present him with a white feather. The white feather was supposed to symbolize cowardice. And so the idea is that they would publicly shame you to join the army. The problem is that they just attacked, they would do this to anybody who didn't have on uniforms. There's like stories of, approaching guys out of uniform and shaming them, and they were actually soldiers who were on leave. Because the idea is that, if you're on the front lines, you don't stay there the entire time. You fight on the front lines, and then you get rotated back to the other trenches till eventually you go on rest and relaxation. So, like, for instance, you might get to go home. And we're talking only a short train ride back home from, France to England, so, or, boat trip anyways. So, you can go and maybe visit with your family and go kind of have like a normal life for a little while again. And so you're not going to be in uniform, obviously. You're not in the Army. You want to just wear your comfy clothes, and someone comes and publicly shames you for not being in the Army. Heck, there was one French guy, I remember reading a story, that they did that to him. And he was like, that's okay, I'll put it right next to this. And he had on, underneath his jacket, the Croix de Guerre, which is it's the highest military honor awarded by France. It's the equivalent of the Congressional Medal of Honor. And so he's just kind of like, just put it right next to that, and they're kind of like, it's a shame of this guy. He was like at the Somme. There was another guy, I think, he was like, I think he was missing a leg, but he had a fake on, so they didn't know it. And so, they made fun, they were shaming and things like that. It's like, well, I lost this one at the Somme. I guess I could lose this one in another battle, something like that. He was discharged from the Army because, what's he going to do? Fight with one leg? Sort of thing like that. So, it definitely had a negative impact. But, it was also effective. It got people involved in the work. But on the right-hand side, you've got Britain as this giant, ugly spider devouring all these different other nations and putting them under its web, and basically they're accusing Britain of, like, you don't really care about us, you're just using this as a power play to try to take over the world. That's the kind of stuff people said about Hitler. He's just trying to take over the world. The fact of the matter is there was kind of a ring of truth to this. Britain was conquering a lot of the world, so, kind of guilty a little bit, but, it's got this kind of thing. It's really just a German plot, or a British plot. And then the sign of Germany, this falcon kind of hanging out here and looking down. It's like, you are the only hope to prevent Britain from taking over the world. So again, it was using fear to try to motivate people. And it wasn't just for soldiers, by the way. It was back home, encouraging, doing without. One of the things we're going to see in the second part of the war is rationing, which I'll go ahead and put on our first total war aspect over here, but we'll get to that here a little bit later. Anyways, we'll talk more about that later. So one thing that's interesting that's going on in Britain is there's a big push against the aristocracy in Britain during World War I, and especially afterwards. Basically, Lloyd George is going to be a commoner who becomes prime minister, and he's going to have a lot of effects later on as he starts to kind of change the way that Britain's going to function after the war, but we'll get to him later. Now, on February 1st, 1970, Germany resumes unrestricted submarine warfare because basically at this point it looked more and more like America was going to join the war. What made that seem was the case is we basically were stopping our exportation of weapons and goods to Germany and really increasing them for Britain. We were also lending a lot of money to Britain, and we were mobilizing troops. We weren't necessarily getting into the war, but we were getting prepared in case we did join the war. But this sent the signal to Germany that they got to do something to try to keep us out of the war. So they ended up sending a telegram to Zimmerman, who was their diplomat in Mexico. And basically they were offering Mexico a deal. If Mexico invaded the United States and attacked and kept us busy in the war, they would finish the war in Europe and then come help them conquer part of the United States. Zimmerman's telegram. That was intercepted by the British, and that basically got us involved in the war. We talked about that already. So the U.S. declares war April 6th of 1917, and then the next day, in order to combat the use of U-boats, Britain started using convoys. Now, convoys are big groups of ships traveling together. It's basically the principle of safety in numbers. If a ship is sunk by a U-boat, it has to expose itself. And when it does that, it's going to be at the mercy of all the other ships in the convoy. So it kind of mitigates the effectiveness of U-boats. However, something else happens in February, the Russian Revolution. Basically, in Russia, there was a lot of angst and anxiety and hatred of the Tsar. This had been building for basically 100 years, 200 years in fact. And so there's a big push back against the Tsar because of World War I. There were too many casualties, it was devastating Russia's economy, and people had had enough. So there was a revolution. With the revolution going on, they ended up signing a treaty with Germany. It was the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. And basically, this is a major turning point in the war because basically Germany had to be fighting two people at the same time. You know, it's sort of like splitting their army in half. Half the army was fighting the Russians in the east, and then the other half was fighting the French and the Germans, or excuse me, the French and the English in the west. So what happens by sealing this border on the east and not having to fight Russia anymore, making peace, now all those folks that were tied up over there are starting to move west. So it looks like Germany's going to come and just crush the Germans, the French, or the French and the British and the French. But the Americans arrive, and basically from that point on, America starts pumping a lot of effort into the war. And so what's going to happen is we're able to push into a very weakened Germany because of it. The war's not over yet. July 17, 1917, King George V also changes his last name to Windsor, which is the house we have now in charge of England. The reason for that is because the name he had before was actually German, because the French and the German and the English thrones were actually linked. And so basically we're trying to separate ourselves. This is again an example of propaganda, separating ourselves from Germany. We're not going to be German anymore. And so there's a lot of hatred towards Germany at this point, as you can imagine. And that's going to be a big part of what happens at the end of the war. So, that's the War Part I. Tomorrow, we'll start War Part II. What's World War I Part II? This is the first half of the war. Right now, we're about halfway through the war. Yeah. Yeah, pretty much. Leading up to the war. So my goal is to finish all the new material for World War I this week. That's my objective. Awesome. No, because we have testing day on Friday. Yeah. Most likely what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a test next Wednesday. So I have the big test on Wednesday. Because, of course, next week, Thursday, we're out at 11:30, and there's no way we're going to be doing anything like a test on that, because I think it's classes are, like 20 minutes. So that's not going to happen.
Next what?
Next Thursday, because it's parade day.
Are we going to pretty much be like off? Not off, but we have like short weeks for the rest of the year.
Pretty much. I think there's 1 or 2 weeks that we have full weeks, but like one of those weeks is the week before finals week, and all you guys are going to be doing is studying again. And then there's another week that is a full week, but you know, I think it's the week before that, so it's like going to be, yeah, it's only like really one more full week. So it's strange to think that I think we're down to what, like 13 days, full days of class.
Really?
Something like.
We have so many projects and stuff and other classes.
Yeah, you guys are done with mine. Is that exciting? I started grading them too, by the way, and so far pretty good.
We're done with all the projects for the year?
Last thing we have to get as big like that is going to be the final exam. And that's, well, kind of. Probably what I'm going to do with the final exam is kind of what I did last time. The only major difference is that the essays are going to be a lot bigger. If that makes any sense. Not like size, but like you're going to have to think more. Like, one of the questions I might ask you is, why was World War I significant? So, other than that, it'll be pretty much the same. So, no big whoop. You guys can handle it. Okay.
Do you know anything about eyes?
What about it?
Like, you know, when I wake up, I have like a fog over my eye.
Yeah.
It happens all the time.
It has